Montana Territory, spring of 1873, the first time Carter Kane saw her. She was barefoot in the muddy alley behind the trading post, elbow deep in a broken crate of spoiled apples, her dress torn at the hem and her dark hair matted from the sudden downpour. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, stepping off his horse, voice low but firm. She flinched and turned, her eyes sharp with shame and defiance. "Trying not to starve." Carter looked her over. She could not have been more than 20, but her face was worn like she had lived twice that already. Her cheeks were hollow, her knuckles scraped raw. She stood her ground though, lips pressed tight. She was not begging, just surviving. He glanced at the apples, then back at her. "Come inside. You can eat something proper." "I'm not looking for charity." "I did not offer any," Carter said, turning and walking toward the post's side door without waiting for her answer. She stared after him a moment before dragging herself upright and following. Inside, warmth wrapped around her like a blanket. Carter handed her a dry towel and pointed to the wooden bench near the stove. She sat, her soaked dress clinging to her legs. "What's your name?" he asked as he ladled stew into a cracked bowl. "Rowena," she said quietly. "Rowena Sinclair." He carried the bowl over, along with a chunk of bread. "Carter Kane." She nodded once, then dug in. She had not eaten in what looked like days. "You from around here?" he asked, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. "No, just passing through." She swallowed hard. "Trying to get to Wyoming. My sister was there, but she died last winter. I have nowhere else." Carter watched her a long moment. "You traveling alone?" "I was," she said, "until the man who offered me a ride decided he wanted something in return. I ran. Lost my bag, my money, everything." He looked away for a moment, jaw tight. Then he asked softly, "Where did you sleep last night?" She gave a small shrug. "Barn outside town." He nodded. "You can stay in the loft out back. No one's using it now. Not much, but it's dry." Rowena blinked at him. "Why are you helping me?" He met her eyes. "Because somebody should have." She looked down at her bowl, her voice barely a whisper. "Nobody's ever wanted me." Carter's voice was steady, his eyes steady on hers. "Then you have not met me yet." Rowena froze, the words hanging between them. The heat from the stove could not match the warmth that bloomed in her chest. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Not once. She blinked fast, looking away. "You do not know me." "Well," Carter said, picking up his hat, "seems like I ought to fix that." That night, Rowena lay in the hayloft, wrapped in a quilt Carter had brought up himself. The rain tapped soft against the roof, and for the first time in weeks, she was not cold. She stared at the shadows on the ceiling, heart tight and confused. She had not trusted anyone in a long time. Trust got you used, broken, left behind. But Carter had looked at her like she mattered, like she was human. She pulled the quilt tighter and closed her eyes. By the end of the week, Rowena had taken over sweeping the trading post and helping Carter organize supplies. She never asked for money, just something to do, something to make her feel like she was not a burden. "Rowena," Carter said one afternoon, as she stacked tins on the shelf, "you do not have to work for every scrap." "I know," she said, not looking at him. "But I want to." He nodded, letting it be. That night, Carter walked her back to the loft after supper. "Do you ever stop moving?" he asked, teasing. She smiled faintly. "If I stop, I think too much." They stood by the ladder. The moon lit her face in silver. "You can stay as long as you want," he said. "No one will run you off." Her voice was soft. "How do I know you won't change your mind?" "Because I do not make promises I cannot keep." She looked at him then, really looked. "You say things like that, and I do not know what to do with them." "Then just believe them," he said. She touched his arm, just for a second. Then climbed the ladder and disappeared into the loft. The next morning, Rowena was in the corral, helping Carter feed the horses. Her sleeves were rolled up, and she smiled more easily now. Carter noticed the way she leaned into the animals, gentle and unafraid. "Did you grow up around horses?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I used to dream about them when I was little. I always wanted a place where I could ride one and not have to be afraid." Carter said nothing, but he went to the stable and came back with his gentlest mare, a gray named Willow. He held out the reins. "Want to try?" Rowena's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Come on," he said with a grin. "She will take good care of you." With his help, she swung up into the saddle. Carter walked beside her, hand on the reins, as she rode in slow circles, laughing for the first time since he had met her. That night, while they played cards by the stove, she looked up at him suddenly. "Do you really mean it?" she asked. "Mean what?" "What you said before. That you want me." Carter set his cards down. "Rowena, I have not stopped thinking about you since that first day. I do not know what tomorrow brings, but I know I want you in it." Her breath hitched. Then she reached across the table and took his hand. "I want that too," she said. He stood and came around the table, pulling her gently to her feet. She looked up at him, eyes full of something vulnerable and new. When he kissed her, it was slow, careful, like he was afraid she might break. But she did not. She leaned into him and the world faded. For the first time in her life, Rowena Sinclair was not running, not hiding, not afraid. She was home. The morning after the snow melted off the ridges east of town, Carter found Rowena kneeling in the garden patch behind the post, hands in the thawed earth. She moved slowly, cautious with her wrist, which had taken a hard knock the day before when the mule cart shifted under load. She hadn't complained, but Carter had noticed the way she drew her sleeve down over the bruised skin. "You planting too early," he said, stepping down from the porch with a tin mug in hand. Rowena straightened, brushing soil from her fingers. "Maybe, but there's something in me that needs to see green come up." He offered her the mug. "Coffee's hot." She took it, fingers wrapping around the dented tin. "Thanks." They stood quiet a while, the hush between them easy now. Geese flew overhead, their cries trailing like threads across the pale sky. Carter watched her from the corner of his eye. There was a steadiness in her this morning, not pride exactly, but something sturdier than survival. "I was thinking about the shed," he said after a moment. "Could clear it out, build up the walls before summer. Might be better living than the loft come July." Rowena looked at him. "You're giving me a house?" "I'm offering to build you one," Carter replied. "If you'll stay." She took a sip from the mug and didn't answer at first. Then, "I never had a place that was mine. Mostly just corners other people didn't want." "Well," Carter said, "this corner's got room." Her eyes flicked to his. "You always this patient?" "No," he said, and the edge of his mouth turned up. "Only with you." Later that afternoon, Rowena rode out with him to the edge of the property line, where the land sloped down toward the cottonwoods. She rode Willow again, more confident now, her back straight, hands sure. Carter led the way on his gelding, letting the horses find their rhythm. The air smelled of mud and pine, and the creek had started to run again, its voice soft and quick over the rocks. "Did you ever think you'd own all this?" she asked. "No," he said. "Didn't think I'd live long enough to have anything worth calling mine." She turned in the saddle slightly. "You were in the war?" He nodded once. "Fought under Sherman. Atlanta, mostly." Rowena looked ahead, her voice low. "My father died in Virginia. Never made it back." He didn't press her. They stopped near the bend in the creek where a fallen tree bridged the water. Carter dismounted and tied his reins loosely to a branch. Rowena slid down from Willow's back and followed him to the water's edge, her boots sinking in the soft bank. Carter crouched and touched the stream with his fingertips. Used to come out here when I couldn't sleep. Still do sometimes. Rowena knelt beside him. What kept you awake? He didn't answer right away. Things I saw. Things I did. She nodded, not asking more. Her gaze drifted across the surface of the water. I used to walk at night back when I was working kitchens. Streets were quieter after dark. Less likely to run into someone who wanted something from you. Do you still think that's what I want? He asked. No, she said. I think you'd rather go slow, even if it kills you. Carter chuckled. I'm not in a hurry. She tilted her head. Maybe I am. He studied her face, the hint of color in her cheeks, the way she held herself now, not like someone bracing for the next blow, but like someone who might be starting to trust her own weight. Then tell me what you want, he said. I want to plant things, she said. I want to wake up in the same bed every morning. I want to learn how to fix a saddle and mend a fence. I want to remember what it feels like to be looked at like I matter. Carter reached forward, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. His voice was quiet. You already do. Rowena leaned into his hand. I know. That's what scares me. I'll hold steady, he said. If you lean, I won't let you fall. She closed her eyes, just for a moment, and nodded. They rode back as the sun slipped behind the ridge. At the post, Carter helped her down as if it were the first time again, his hand lingering at her waist. Inside, she stoked the fire while he gathered tools. She didn't ask what for. By dusk the next day, the shed's walls were stripped, the old timbers laid out for measuring and cut. Carter showed her how to fit the saw teeth to the grain, how to brace her foot when hammering. She learned fast, her shoulders strong despite the bruises. That evening, as they sat on the stoop watching the sky pin Ken, Rowena nudged his leg with hers. You building this for me or with me? With you, he said without hesitation. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Carter looked down at her. You still thinking of leaving? Not anymore, she said. Not if you'll let me stay. He took her hand, calloused and warm from work. You're already home, he said. The first wildflower bloomed beneath the fence line the same morning. Carter handed Rowena a square of folded canvas. You'll need this if you're coming with me, he said, adjusting the saddle cinch on his gelding. Rowena unfolded the cloth. Inside were a pair of worn gloves and a set of half-blunted shears. She looked up. Where are we going? Up past the North Ridge. Old Trapper's place burned out last fall. There's timber standing that's still good. Thought we'd see what we can drag back. She slid the gloves on, flexing her fingers. You trust me with your tools? You've got a steadier hand than I do some days. He didn't add the reason his shoulder stiffened in the cold ever since Shiloh, but she'd already noticed the way he favored his left when hauling heavy boards. She didn't mention it either. They had grown used to what went unspoken. By midday, the trail narrowed into scrub. The horses picked their way carefully between stones and deadfall. Carter rode ahead, Rowena close behind. Her braid was fraying in the wind, loosened by the ride. He caught a glimpse of her profile when she turned to check on Willow behind them, chin slightly lifted, eyes narrowed against the sun. She looked sure of herself. At the cabin's remains, Carter dismounted and walked the perimeter. The roof had caved in, but the beams stacked along the sidewall were untouched by fire. He ran a hand along one, then nodded. These'll do. Rowena stepped beside him, tugging off her gloves. I can help drag the lighter ones. He looked at her. You sure? I didn't ride all this way for the view. They worked without hurry. Carter lifted while Rowena steadied, and together they eased 3 long timbers onto the travois tied to the gelding's saddle. When her foot slipped on a patch of ash, she caught herself with a hand on his arm. "You all right?" "Just clumsy," she said, brushing soot from her skirt. He leaned closer, voice low. "You're not." Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. On the ride back, the silence between them held a weight that wasn't heavy, just full. The kind of quiet that came when two people had nothing to prove and nothing to hide. That evening, Rowena sat on the floor of the post, mending a tear in Carter's shirt. She worked by lamplight, threading the needle with slow precision. Carter sat nearby, polishing the latch on the old rifle he kept above the counter. "Was that cabin owner someone you knew?" she asked without looking up. "Name was Lowry. Didn't say much. Kept to himself." "What happened?" "Winter came hard. He wasn't ready." She tied off the thread and ran her fingers along the seam. "Did you ever think about leaving? Trying somewhere else?" He looked at her then, his thumb pausing on the bolt. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be." She nodded once, then stood and handed him the shirt. "It's not perfect." He took it from her. "Neither am I." They both smiled, faint and warm. Later, after the fire was banked and the horses fed, Carter stepped onto the porch. Rowena leaned against the post, arms folded, eyes on the stars. "You can see farther out here," she said. He joined her, resting one hand on the railing. "What do you see?" She hesitated. "A life I didn't think I'd get." "You still don't believe it's yours?" "I'm trying," she said. "It's just, sometimes I wake up expecting to be gone again." He turned toward her, voice quiet. "You're not." She looked at him, the wind tugging strands from her braid. "I want to believe that." "You will," he said. "I'll show you every day." She stepped closer, her fingers brushing his. "I never thought someone like you would wait for someone like me." "I wasn't waiting," Carter said. "I was just living. Then you came." She tilted her head, studying him. "And now I'm sure." He touched her cheek, gentle as if learning the shape of something sacred. She leaned into the touch, eyes closing. And then she kissed him. There was nothing rushed in it. No hunger, no fear. Just the slow, steady truth of two lives joining. When they pulled apart, her forehead rested against his chest. "Don't let this slip away," she whispered. "I won't," he said. "Not ever." Inside, the lamp still burned, casting gold across the floorboards. The little house they'd started together waited, half-built but certain. And for the first time in either of their lives, the future felt like a place they could walk into side by side. The rains came late that spring. They rolled in from the west, steady and cold, soaking the soil and swelling the creek until it lapped at the lower edge of the pasture fence. Carter stood at the window of the post one morning, oil lanterns still burning behind him, watching the clouds crawl like smoke across the sky. Behind him, Rowena moved quietly, folding a blanket she'd taken in from the line before the storm started. "You ever get floods up this way?" she asked. "Every so often," he said. "Mostly the lowland. The rest holds if the ground's not too dry." She crossed to the stove, opened the iron door, and poked at the coals with the firehook. "The wind last night lifted one of the chicken boxes. I had to chase down that speckled hen before she got herself into the creek." Carter turned from the window, brushing a hand over his jaw. "You're quick on your feet." "I've had practice," she said, her voice light but not flippant. He leaned against the doorframe. "You ever think about getting more? More chickens. More of everything. Land. Livestock. A real barn. Maybe even a proper kitchen." She looked up from the stove, her expression unreadable. "You thinking of expanding?" "I'm thinking I don't want this place to stay just mine," he said. Not if you're in it. Rowena set down the firehook. You mean for good? I do, Carter said. She crossed the room slowly, the hem of her skirt whispering against the floorboards. I never stayed anywhere long enough to plan for anything. You've stayed here, he said. Long enough to build half a house and run the whole post better than I ever did. She stepped close, her fingers curling lightly around the edge of his shirt. And if I say I want more? Then we start figuring out what that looks like, he said, steady. Her eyes searched his face. What if I want a garden bigger than the one behind the post? Then we'll clear out the south slope and fence it in. She tilted her head, brow furrowed. And if I want a family one day? Carter didn't hesitate. Then we raise one. Together. She pressed her palm flat to his chest, just over his heart. You always answer like you've been waiting to say these things. I have, he said, since the day you walked into that alley. Rowena didn't speak. She just leaned forward and rested her forehead against his shoulder. Carter wrapped an arm around her waist, holding her close as the rain ticked against the roof. The following week, once the ground dried enough to hold a wagon, Carter hitched the team and drove with Rowena into Livingston. It was their first time leaving the property together since the thaw. She wore her hair pinned up beneath a straw bonnet, a hand-sewn ribbon tied beneath her chin. The post's books were balanced, the shelves stocked, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel like she needed to be everywhere at once. They passed a schoolhouse on the edge of town. Children were outside, running barefoot through the wet grass, their laughter carrying on the wind. Rowena watched them from the wagon. They look like they've never been afraid of anything. Carter glanced over. You'd be a good mother. She took a long breath. I used to wonder if I'd be too hard for it. Too weathered. Hard things don't break easy, he said. They hold. In town, Carter bought nails, window glass, and a length of canvas to cover the shed roof before summer. Rowena lingered outside the general store, her eyes catching on a bolt of blue calico behind the glass. Carter followed her gaze. Want it? She shook her head. It's too fine for what I do. He stepped inside, came out a few minutes later with the fabric wrapped in brown paper, and set it gently in her lap. It's not about what you do, he said. It's about who you are. She didn't argue, didn't deflect. Just held the parcel to her chest and looked at him like he'd handed her something far heavier than cloth. On the ride home, a coyote crossed the road ahead, lean and quick, vanishing into the grass. Rowena watched it go. You think you'd have done all this if I hadn't shown up? She asked. Don't know, Carter said. But I know I wouldn't have had a reason to. She turned her face toward him, her bonnet casting a shadow over her eyes. You gave me back more than safety. He met her gaze. You gave me a life I didn't know I was missing. They rode the rest of the way in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. By the time they reached the post, the sun had dipped low, casting long light across the hills. Carter helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering a moment too long at her waist. She stepped close, voice quiet. I think I'm ready. For what? For all of it, she said. The house, the land, everything we haven't named yet. Carter nodded, his voice rough. Then let's start tomorrow. Rowena looked toward the half-built house, the dirt-packed path they'd walked 100 times, and the fence line where the wildflowers had started to bloom again. Then she looked back at him. I'm not afraid anymore, she said. Carter took her hand in his. You don't have to be, he said. You're mine now, and I'm yours. Carter cleared the last of the brush from the south slope by late June. The soil was softer there, holding the memory of river silt from years past. Rowena stood at the edge, linen apron tied at her waist, a basket hanging from one hand, her other shielding her eyes from the sun. Never thought I'd be planting rows instead of counting steps between towns. she said as he stepped beside her. You think a dozen rows is enough? I think we'll need twice that, she said. I want to see corn stretching tall by August, and beans winding up poles like they got somewhere to be. He looked at her, the way she stood with her foot nudging the edge of a furrow, already thinking seasons ahead. He could see the shape of what they were building in her posture alone. You'll get it done, he said. You always do. Rowena turned to him. I want to build something that stays. That doesn't vanish when the wind changes or when someone decides I'm no longer worth the bother. You've already built that, he said. We both have. She nodded slowly, then crouched to test the soil. When she stood again, her hands were dark with earth. She wiped them on her apron and gave him a look she hadn't given anyone else, something quiet and certain. That night, she brought out a small tin box she kept in the drawer near the stove. She set it on the table, opened it, and pulled out a folded paper with a worn emblem at the corner. This was my mother's marriage license, she said. She kept it even after he left. Said it reminded her that once, someone promised her a life. Carter looked at the paper, then at Rowena. You holding on to it for the same reason? I'm thinking of letting it go, she said. If I've got something better. He reached into the coat hanging by the door and pulled out a small muslin pouch. He set it next to the tin. I've had this since April, he said. Didn't want to push. Rowena opened it. Inside was a ring, silver, simple, shaped by a blacksmith's hand, not a jeweler's. It's not fancy, he said, but it's honest. She touched the ring, then looked up. I don't need fancy. Carter stepped close, his hand covering hers. We could ride into town next week, talk to the preacher. I'd like that, she said, but I'd rather do it right here, with the roof we built and the dirt we turned. His voice softened. Then here it is. They married the following Sunday. The sun rose warm and steady, and Rowena wore the blue calico dress she'd sewn herself. Carter shaved for the first time in weeks and wore his cleanest shirt, the one she'd mended back in early spring. They stood on the porch, just the two of them, while the preacher from town read from a small cloth-bound book. Afterward, Rowena and Carter shared coffee and cornbread with the few neighbors who'd come to witness. No music, no fuss, just hands held and words spoken plain. By August, the house stood finished. Windows framed the hills, and the porch stretched wide enough for 2 rocking chairs. Carter built her a root cellar, and Rowena filled it with jars of wild blackberry preserves and pickled beans. She kept her bonnet by the door and a leather-bound ledger beside the stove, full of planting notes and supply lists. One evening, as the crickets stirred and the sky turned the color of worn denim, she sat on the porch steps, her feet bare, a knitted shawl draped around her shoulders. Carter handed her a mug of coffee, then sat beside her, his arm looped around her back. I've been thinking, she said, about building up the back pasture. Maybe a milk cow. Or 2. You're not ready to rest yet? She tilted her head toward him. I think I'm finally rested enough to begin. He kissed her temple, slow and sure. Then we'll begin. The seasons turned as they always did. Leaves browned, snow fell, and spring came again. They lived quiet but full days made of fence mending and seed planting, nights of soft voices and shared quilts. Carter never raised his voice, and Rowena never looked over her shoulder. He carved her a wooden box for her keepsakes, and she stitched his initials into the cuffs of his shirts. They didn't need to say the words every day. They showed them instead. Years passed, and the garden grew, and the post remained a place where folks came for supplies and stayed for the warmth that lived in its walls. Rowena stood in the doorway one morning, watching the sun rise over land that was no longer borrowed or feared but theirs. Carter came up behind her, slid his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "What are you looking at?" he asked. "Everything I never thought I'd have," she said. And everything I never want to lose. You won't, he said. Not while I've got breath. She turned toward him, smile slow, eyes steady. Then I'm home for good. And she was.